Gerard Dipoto, Jerry D himself, Trader Jerry.
Or as your brother used to call him,
Dipoto.
Jerry Dipoto.
Jerry Dipoto, who has been head of Mariners baseball operations since September of 2015, will continue on, according to the reporting from the Seattle Times, as the head of the Mariners baseball operations for at least another season. Now, after they fired Scott Service, we sort of already had a sense this was the direction the organization was going to go. Things only got worse after they fired Scott Service. Got a little bit better and then a little bit worse. Now they are, as we mentioned, only 4.5 back from Houston, but their playoff odds are now below 10%. I think this is not a shocking decision, but I think the main takeaway here is this is a bet that the things that he is doing well, which are under his leadership, they have obviously developed an elite rotation and they have restocked a farm system consistently over and over. This was a team that was basically at the bottom of farm system rankings for years. And now, even when they've graduated a bunch, have already, because of how well they've drafted, launched it back up to, a top 10 system. When we talk about all the Mariners' flaws offensively, I think that this isn't going to make the rest of the season any more pleasant because I still expect them to come short and they still are going to have a lot to fix this winter that they cannot fix internally. However, this really does seem to be a bet on this next wave of mostly hitters probably getting to the big leagues sooner than we expect, because those are the guys, if we really are going to find out whether they are good or truly terrible, as bad as it gets at developing hitters, it's the now up to whatever 8 top 100 prospects that they have. A lot of these hitters at all positions, outfielders, first basemen, infield, shortstops, catchers, all these guys that have slowly risen to the minors, that all the prospect people think all these guys are awesome. Those guys really better start hitting, and those guys better get to the big leagues by the end of next year or ready for 2026, because otherwise it's just not good enough. That's the bet here. And it's also a sign that ownership does not want to bother to go through an actual upheaval of both the entire coaching staff and obviously the entire front office. So they are going with continuity. You can criticize that for sure. I think that I completely understand if you're looking at this after 10 years, they made the postseason one time and say, it's not good enough, we got to go in a different direction. That's totally valid. I can't really dispute that. But he has done just enough right that he's going to get one more chance here. But based on how the rest of the season goes, man, like I said, postseason or not, if they finish at or below 500 after averaging 90 wins the last 3 seasons, that's just going to make this offseason all the more difficult. And the messaging is going to have to change, because they can't just say, oh, we came up just short. It's like, no, you just weren't even very good. And that is what is going to be really difficult for this team, optics-wise, to really get over this winter, basically no matter what happens, barring a total miraculous run to the playoffs.
Every baseball executive head honcho needs to be evaluated within the constraints placed upon them by the ownership group, right? So if Jerry Dipoto was allowed to spend like Andrew Friedman in LA or like Brian Cashman in New York, I think the roster would be better. And I think that the conversation about Dipoto would be different. Now, what is frustrating about Dipoto specifically is his comments last offseason about winning 54% of games. It's not exactly the way to get your fan base going. And Dipoto is the type of executive who fits within the context of his environment, where he is stay the course, don't panic, ride it out. I want to see how Jerry Dipoto on the hot seat operates. Because while you don't want your president of baseball operations operating with panic or mania, a little urgency, I think, goes a long way.
Yeah.
And I, particularly in assembling the Mariners offensive group, he has rarely shown urgency or a willingness to significantly upgrade certain elements of the roster. Now, trading for Randy at the deadline this year, that's a big plus in his column. That's the type of move that a team with a pitching staff this good should have been making for a long time. I know Jerry transacts quite a bit, but a lot of it is just shuffling the lounge chairs on the Titanic.
Yep.
And I think I want to see him act with his foot on the gas a little bit more, and maybe a season like this will inspire him to do that.
Yeah, and it just becomes hard because I think your point about ownership is spot on, but it's also it's not even it's almost more subtle than that, right? Because it's moves like salary dumping Eugenio Suarez. You know, I mean, if they had him at third base this year with what he's been for Arizona, they'd be in a better spot. And they decided, oh, we're gonna get creative. We're gonna do it with Josh Rojas and Luis Urias. It's like, all right, well, but you could also just have a regular third baseman making a normal amount of money. You know, it's stuff like that. And there's all kinds of moves that they've made because of that. Not necessarily because they're not willing to spend. But to your point too, yes, they have made some aggressive maneuvers, but a lot of them just haven't worked. You know, and so that's ultimately why I think fans are done waiting, is because he has made a ton of moves, and more of them on the offensive side have fallen short than actually reached expectations. So I think that's what he's going to be judged by. But I do agree with you, especially if they finish around 500. They can't pretend like they are right there with Houston anymore, because I mean, I guess they can. Like it's so weird to say like, yeah, you were 10 games up on them, but that had more to do with Houston's problems than you actually playing very well. But you can't pretend like you're right up there with them. Like, no, they just embarrassed you over the last 3 months of the season. For the last few years, you could say, oh, right there, just a couple moves. Can't say that anymore. You can't. Yep. You just cannot pretend that. I mean, I even believed it, right? After the 2022, with what the pitching was coming, I was like, yeah, they should be able to compete with them. And I guess for a couple months they did. But no, you can't say that with a straight face. So we'll see how these last few weeks shake out, whether it makes any difference. It clearly doesn't make any difference for his job security. But that's kind of where I'm at on Jerry D. And, you know, the Dipoto tracker lives, baby. He's made 175 trades as Mariners Pobo GM, and we'll see if he can get to 200 before he gets canned.